Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in to the 3D engraving tutorial. So we're going to be doing some 2.5D, 3D, whatever you want to call it, engraving with Lightburn's 3D slice mode. My goal is to not give you the perfect setup and the perfect method, because there's no one right way to do it, but give you my method and what I found through testing to help you achieve a good result on your first attempt, so that you don't get, what I hope to do is help you achieve a good result on the first try, get you some positive feedback so that you are not dissuaded from attempting the 3D slicing mode any further, and that you have a positive experience. So what I need you to do first is go to the description, click the link for Patriot Nation Design and the 3D wavy flag grayscale. Head on over to Patriot Nation Design's website. Enter the coupon code Light Source Engraving, all one word. You will be able to download that file for free. Thank you, Patriot Nation Design, for supplying the file for everybody to follow along with this tutorial. I greatly appreciate it. Check out all their other files. They've got lots of great stuff for 3D engraving, diode lasers, CO2 lasers, you name it, there's something there for everyone. So let's take a quick look at their website, since we were talking about it. All right, so here we are at Patriot Nation Design. The link will take you to the wavy flag. So all you'll have to do is add that to your cart, enter the coupon code. Then you can look through all the files they have, and they list what formats are included. And you can download them multiple times if you need to. It's a great resource for all kinds of files. Now, I tested a bunch of coins and a bunch of settings on aluminum and brass and steel, and you're going to ask, where'd you get your coins? Well, you can get cheap ones from Amazon or from China or wherever, but there are two suppliers, USA based, that I recommend. The first is Laserable Items, that is owned by Jeff Stockton. Supplier I recommend. His website is Swiss Bui, B-U-I, so it's SWISSBUI.com. Tested lots of aluminum. And I have another aluminum plate over here with the last two designs. You'll see those. So you'll see two of the tests there, brass coin and aluminum. Those are both ran with the same settings, exact same. One took 24 minutes, one took 19 minutes. The difference is the size of the graphic. I think it was a 35 versus a 30, which 35 is your standard coin. So I have a special shirt for this video. Size matters, and it does. And you see the formula. If you don't know, that is the formula for calculating the spot size of your laser beam based on your beam quality, your beam diameter as it enters the lens, your focal length. So let's get into a little bit of science, not too much, but a little bit. And then we'll go through some of the test results, and then we'll go through settings. And then I'll show you what settings I used at the very end to get the best result at the fastest speed. Because in the end, that's what I wanted to find out. What was the best result, the most smooth surface at the absolute fastest speed I could run it. A grayscale image can take 20 minutes, and then you bring in a totally different grayscale image, and maybe it takes an hour. Well, there's a reason for that, and we'll explain that as well. All right, before I get too far in this video, there is a new Facebook group I wanted to mention. It is called Fiber Laser Level Up: free ImagR Files. There's a link in the description to that group. They currently have some grayscale files for giveaway, and they're running a coin contest with one particular grayscale. So head to that group, check it out, and make a coin with their file and enter their contest. But do that after you head to Patriot Nation Design, download the file we're using in this video, so you can try to make one of your own. And one other thing I want to mention if you head to the Lightburn YouTube channel, they have about a 5-minute 3D engraving quick tutorial. Provides a good high-level overview of the steps for 3D engraving, and it gets into converting the STL to a PNG, a grayscale PNG. I'm not going to cover this in part 1. I'm going to have a part 2 and part 3, and then we're going to get into creating the grayscales from your STLs and even manipulating those with a couple free Windows programs that are fairly easy to use to add additional graphics to the STL. For example, I did a coin and added the year and some other text along the curvature of the coin that was already an STL file. So I did that in 3D Builder that's available free on Windows. So stick around for part 2 and 3 whenever I get those finished and released. Those will be coming soon. All right, let's start off by me showing you 2 sides of the same coin. This side took 1 hour, and then I actually wet tumbled it to get it shiny. Then, by finding the optimal settings, I was able to get this side of the coin in about 19 minutes. And it was not wet tumbled, it was just finished with the laser and then a light brushing with a brass brush. That was it. And it still looks really good. So for a 20-minute coin, if you're not needing to go super deep with just an image like we're using, you don't have to. You can make it deeper, you can run more passes, but if you go too deep, sometimes it might ruin the look of it. So it's totally up to you. You're the artist, you make the decisions and get the product to look the way you want it to. I also wanted to show you the image that the Fiber Laser Level Up Facebook group is giving away. Is this little bear with the money bag. That is the 3D grayscale they're giving away. This is a test run I did last night on a steel plate. This particular grayscale is an example of one that took about 1 hour using the same settings on the grayscale I did on steel with our wavy flag design that took 20 minutes. All right, so here we have 2 grayscales that are similar in size. The wavy round I did do about a little bit smaller. So we have the bear. It's coming in about 35 millimeters, 34. Then we have this round that's coming in about 28. So you would expect the flag to run faster. It'll get done sooner. It's not going to run faster, it'll just finish sooner because it's a smaller graphic. However, there was a substantial difference in the time. The bear ran in 1 hour. The flag round ran in 20 minutes. So 20 minutes versus an hour. And it was 6 or 7 millimeters difference. That difference can be accounted for the negative space around the bear. It is a solid black. Solid black is going to burn deeper and take longer because so when the 3D slices are created, you'll have white space where nothing's being burnt. When that happens, your laser will jump over those, so then it's going to go back to your jump speed, jump settings, and if it's making more jumps, it's going to finish quicker. So the more dark blacks you have, and absolute blacks, the longer your engrave's going to take. All right, so that leads me to answers to a couple questions that have came up on the forums. And I'm going to put a slide up here and you can read along with me. But Jason has said, this is why you cannot specify a rotation angle. Basically, it requires resampling, and if it's not an exact 90 degree, then based on his resampling method, it will not produce an accurate slice, and it will not perfectly overlap. So that is the main reason. But he says once the app supports STL models, means it is eventually going to support it. So great things to look forward to. How does the Lightburn 3D slicing process work? It resamples, repaints the image at the desired DPI and orientation, rasterizes it using threshold with the cutoff set differently for each pass. By making the scans only at 90-degree multiples, I can guarantee the passes line up with pixel accuracy. So those deep blacks are going to show up in more and more of those slices. And the absolute black is going to show up in every slice, so it's getting the deepest burn. So that is why the darker areas will take longer. The lighter areas, because you're not going to have as many passes running over the light areas. So here's a good example of a lot of the testing that I did, just playing around. So the first bit of science I want to look at is why size matters in our beam spot size calculator. There's a website, links in the description, where you can plug in numbers for your laser and lens and calculate a fairly accurate spot size. So I took a screenshot from the spot size calculator. For my JPT, the beam diameter is 7 millimeter. I was using a 200 millimeter area lens, which is f290, 1064 wavelength. The beam quality on my JPT is 1.4. So it's calculating that the beam diameter at focus is 78 micrometers. So to make that easy math in my head, what I like to do is just add a 0 to it. In the front, and a decimal, and if you're converting that to your line distance, it's 0.0786. Without getting too much into the theory of perfect beam quality, a perfect beam quality is rated at 1.0. So the beam quality of our lasers can range between 1.34 up to 1.6 or 7, maybe even higher. At a perfect 1, the beam quality matches this bell curve. And within one standard deviation of the mean, you would have, of the average, you would have approximately 70% of your beam. However, that is not the case. Our beam isn't perfect. Therefore, it lies outside of the first standard deviation, so it's going to be a little wider. So by knowing that, we can at least gauge a place to start with our line distance to run it as fast as possible, but maintain quality and eliminate pitting. What I call pitting is the obvious pulses of the laser at a certain speed, certain kilohertz, and certain power. Trying to see exactly how much is distributed more towards the point of the beam and the focus, and how much is towards the outside. If you think of a perfect beam, it would be like a spotlight, where an imperfect beam becomes more like a floodlight with more area being covered. So your power density changes based on your spot size and your beam quality. So each hit of the laser, how much power is it put into your material, changes based on your lens size and the beam quality of your particular laser source. So how can we just take this little bit of information and translate it into what settings should I use for the laser? If you start looking at your beam spot size, you can break it down and fine tune it to the point where you're putting down dots with your laser at a frequency that produces a nice consistent removal of material. And then you can space those close enough together that you have a nice consistent removal of material from pass to pass. Then as those rotate, you hope to get a fairly consistent smooth surface. So That's what I was trying to find out with these tests. How can I get the smoothest surface at the quickest speed? So now let's look at some of the results under the microscope and see how different settings compare, and that will bring me to the final setting that I landed on. All right, for all my tests, I ran 200 passes, 90% power, 500 Q pulse. I did not do any finishing cleanup passes on any of these tests. For the first one, I approximated my beam size, spot size, and ran a 0.085. And you can see the lines of the crosshatch. I just ran a few passes and that was enough to determine that is not a good setting. So then I moved on to 200 passes at a 0.05 line distance at a 40 frequency, 4,000 speed. You can see the pitting along the edges of this test engrave. So I tried to capture around the star area of every test engrave for easy comparison. So then I changed to a 0.03 line distance. And it's starting to look better, a little more smooth. Then I changed to a 0.025. But you can see there's still some pitting there, and it's just not as smooth as we would like it to be. So the next change I made was to slow it down so it'd have more dots hitting the surface more frequently, and it smoothed out a little bit more. All right, so I kept these parameters the same, slowed it down to 3,000, and ran this in, it was not 21:56, I think it was about 18 minutes. Yeah, it was about the same as this one. And this one was actually slower, that's not faster, that's not correct. So with the 3,000 speed, it looked better, but still not great. With 4,000 speed and a frequency of 50, so we're getting more pulses at a faster speed, it still left it looking pitted and not clean. So then the next test, I kept it at a 0.04 line distance and ran 3,050, so a little slower, higher frequency. It was starting to look better. Then I changed it to 3,050 and a 0.025 line distance. It was looking better and more smooth at this point, but after consulting with Geo, we thought that we can still get that to look much better and run faster, which that led to running a speed of 3,000, frequency of 50 and a 0.025 in 28 minutes, compared to 3,050 and a 0.04 in 18 minutes. So we shaved 10 minutes off, and they have a very similar look. They're pretty close, but we could still do better. This is the 0.025, this is the 0.4. They look very close, especially without finishing passes or not having the dust cleaned off. They're very close, and they look close under the microscope, like almost identical. The 0.025 did go deeper, but overall appearance was the same. And here you can see where the 0.25 on this side did go deeper than the 0.04 on this side. And then this is a slide comparing what finishing pass on the left side looks like versus no finishing pass. So the finishing pass helps knock off all the dust and slag and basically clean it up a little bit. That's why we see it as being brighter, and it gets white as all this dark stuff is removed. And here's what it looks like under the camera. So this is clean side on the left, no cleaning on the right. After Geo and I discussed it more, we thought, let's run higher frequencies and then split the line distance between the 0.25 and the 0.04, and let's run it a little faster. So that's what we did. I ran it at 70 kilohertz and at 80 kilohertz. And as you can see, the 70 still had a more pitted, not as clean look. The 80 frequency was enough to put down more dots, even at that faster speed, and reduce the power just a little bit enough so that we ended up with a smoother result and not the pitting that we saw in some of the other settings. So for this 80 watt JPT, it has the max peak pulse of 2 at 40 kilohertz and 500 Q. So if I leave the Q at 500 and increase the frequency above 40, it will start restricting power. So as we came up to 80, it's definitely dropping power back. So with that power reduction combined with the increased frequency of that laser pulsing, we were able to get a much smoother surface. Everything I'd ran up until that point was 200 passes, so you could see the layer lines. They look like a topographical map. For grayscale, there are 256 levels of gray. So just to do a standard coin, if I wasn't going to worry about how deep it went or any other factors, I would always run 256 passes, one for each level of gray. So that's what I did, but the exact same settings. The only thing I changed was 200 passes versus 256 passes. And if you really focus on this area, you can see that the 256 passes was much smoother. And if you look in these areas, you can see that it is definitely deeper. And overall looks pretty good without a finishing pass. So then I ran a brass coin with the exact same settings on this coin from swissbuoy.com. 28.5 millimeters was the area to be engraved, the diameter of that circle. It finished in 19 minutes and 23 seconds. And this is no finishing pass, that was just straight off the laser. So it looked pretty good, and that's a little bit out of focus, so it doesn't look as good as it could have. So now that we know the spot size of my lens and laser combination, we can then start testing. And what I found through all this testing is if you find your spot size for your laser and lens combo, and you start between 0.325 and 0.5, so 33% to 50% of your spot size, then that is a great place to start working on your settings for 3D engraving and any other engraving too, because it's going to come out fairly smooth and even. So for my laser, that calculated out to 30. If I did 35% of 0.0786, I ended up with 0.02. 50% of 0.786 rounded to 0.04. So that's where I ended up, and final setting was right in between those two. So hopefully that gives you a great place to start in calculating your line distance as a place to start based on your spot size. All right, so next, Geo did a conversion for my final settings for the 80 watt JPT. Now the Raycus only has a 1 millijoule peak pulse, where the JPT has a 2. It's 50 watt versus 80 watt. And the beam quality is 1.6 versus 1.4. So he ran the conversion through his calculator. And I was able to get this result with the 50 watt Raycus running at 2628 speed, 50 kilohertz, 90%, 0.022 line distance in 37 minutes, 28 seconds. If you have a JPT that has a higher peak pulse, so if you have a JPT with a higher peak pulse than 1.0 millijoule, you'll be able to achieve this result in a quicker time just by having the increased peak pulse available. So in the end, all that tells us is that size does matter. Spot size will definitely make a difference in our quality, and by using that spot size value, we can determine what line distance to roughly start at to begin testing to try to get the most optimal results. What I tried to do was strike a balance between speed and detail, and I think struck a pretty good balance, especially when you see some of the close-up shots. You can see the details in the coins, and there's another graphic that I did want to show. So Geo was able to convert my settings from the 200 lens to the 110 lens. And with that, I was able to achieve that level of detail. And like I said, based on that graphic, it took approximately 1 hour just due to the deeper blacks. Now, the other steel that I did that we saw in the previous, that was a 20-minute engrave, just based on the grayscale. So where other calculators that convert settings fail, they do not take into consideration the spot size and the percent of power at that spot size, or level of power at the spot size. By not taking those factors into consideration, you're not going to get a true conversion, because lens has a lot to do with it. Beam quality has a lot to do with that, as you can see from the formula, where it takes into consideration beam quality and your lens size. All right, let's get into Lightburn and import the graphic from Patriot Nation Design. So I did import it, and here's how it comes in. Basically, all we need to do is go to roughly the center of the graphic, select your ellipse tool, and let's just draw a circle. Hold down Shift and Control until it encompasses the main part of the graphic. Then go back with your selection tool, select that line and the image. And let's see, oops, there's a problem. So let's change this to, we don't want it to fill there, so let's delete that. So we just have our line. Then we select the line and the image. I'll just grab them both like that, and then apply mask to image. And there we have just the circle of the graphic that we want to engrave. Now, I overshot the edge a little bit, but that's okay. I'm just going to leave it. Then we can go to flatten mask, and then it will become the true size of the circle. Then you can change the size to whatever you need it to be. So let's change it to 35. All right. So I overshot the circle so that it would differentiate between the one I just imported and the one that I applied my image adjustment preset. So I have a preset in Lightburn that I like to use for coin adjustment. And basically what I try to do is get the darks a little darker and the lights a little lighter, just to create more of a difference in the 3D texture. So I just go to Adjust Image, and here's where you can start playing with your contrast, brightness, and gamma. I didn't do too much to this image. It was in pretty good shape. You can see as you adjust these, you're playing with the depth of your engraving for a grayscale. So think of it that way. Darker makes it deeper, lighter makes it not as deep. There's a different one I've used in the past that would definitely make that darker and create even more, a more dramatic difference between the text and the outer ring, and more dramatic between the, say, the two and the depth of the flag. But when you make it darker, it's going to take longer. So it's personal preference. It's up to the artist. It's up to you what you would like to do. So what I used for this coin was the PND 3D tutorial, which made it a little bit darker. You could see the outer ring of the coin is a little darker. It kind of, the text pops out a little bit more. So it's just a slight adjustment. Increase the contrast, decrease the brightness a little bit, and I didn't mess with the gamma. And that's produced a great result. So once we do that and hit OK, then we have two identically shaded grayscales. Now to set up your settings, I have this set to 3D slice. This most recent is what I ran on the steel with the 110 lens. So I ran at a speed of 4154, power of 90, frequency 142, Q of 500. And since I was using a smaller lens with a smaller spot size, it decreased the interval to 0.02. If you were going to run engravings at a speed of 4,000 and expect good results, you need to work on your timings. These are your timings. Geo is working on a timing test file for Lightburn and a timing video just to quickly explain these timings and what they do. And then his file will allow you to run it, see where the problems are, and quickly manipulate those numbers to get an optimal result. But if your timings are not on at 4,000, you're going to have terrible result. When you're doing your timings, the galvo mirrors are stable at a speed of 4,000. So do your timings at a speed of 4,000. If they're nailed down at 4,000, they should be good to go under 4,000. But at least if you're engraving at a higher speed, you will get much better results. And when it comes to timings for images or 3D grayscale or rotary, and then if you combine any of those, if your timing's off, you're going to have terrible results. It'll be abysmal. In Lightburn, when you go into your cut settings, there is a button to show timings. If you're having terrible results, click that button to show timings and make sure that override default timings is not checked. That's happened and it's easy to overlook. I've done it myself and wondered, why does this look like crap? And then I take a closer look and realize, well, the timing's off. Oh, it's probably set to override the defaults and it's something I didn't catch in my settings. So always double check that. And that's located right here. Double click your layer, show timings. If it says override default, those are so far off from what mine should be, I would have terrible results. So that's all it takes to set up a grayscale in Lightburn for slicing. So we covered 256 passes as a default for any grayscale. If you want to go deeper and try to bring out more detail, you can run 500 passes. There's no rule against it. There's no right way. There's no wrong way. Well, I guess if you were running 3 passes and expecting 3D engraving, that would be the wrong way. But at least shoot for 150 to 200 at a minimum, and then maximum. Well, I don't think there really is a maximum. So import that grayscale, get it to look the way you want it. You can use the mask to create the circle shape, and then we can just go right back here to Lightburn and I'll show you some settings. Okay folks, Geo over at Maker Theory has graciously ran my settings through his calculator and gave some basic settings that should compare to the settings that I ran on the aluminum and brass with my 200 lens. Okay, this is comparing my 200 lens. And that would be 4200 speed, power of 90, frequency of 80, Q pulse of 500, 0.032 line intervals, and then you can set your passes whatever you want. So when we get into what setting for your laser is going to give you the highest peak pulse, you get your max power output frequency by dividing your max wattage rating. Divide that by your max peak pulse. So for my laser, we have an 80 watt divided by a 2 millijoule will equal 40 kilohertz. So if I'm wanting to use the 2 millijoule peak pulse, I need to run it at 40 kilohertz. And then your max Q pulse is given to you by the manufacturer. So 80 watts divided by 2 is 40 kilohertz. So now we have settings for 60 watt M7E series with the 200 lens. You would run that at 3180, frequency 53, power of 90, Q of 500, line distance of 0.036. And why is that different? He's using the beam quality and spot size factored into those calculations. If you have the 60 watt with a 70 millimeter lens, here are the corresponding settings. A 50 watt JPT LPE with the 200 lens, here are the corresponding settings. And for the Raycus, my JPT, based on the settings I use, is outputting 1.44 millijoule peak pulse. So the Raycus is going to output 0.90, which is a significant difference. So we have to run that at 2628, frequency 50, power of 90, but run a smaller line distance to compensate for that decreased peak pulse and the lower beam quality. So that was for the Raycus and the 175 lens. So if you have a 50 watt Raycus and 175 lens, these are your settings to try out. If you have a 200 lens, you can increase this line distance a little bit. The final conclusion is that spot size does matter, and when you're converting settings, you have to take into account the energy density of that spot. Otherwise, you're just not going to get the same results just on a straight percentage conversion. Now, I showed most of those except one without any finishing passes. Now, you can do finishing passes, and those can smooth up the surface even more, even on the 3D engraving. So we can also run a setting that brightens it up and makes it shiny, which is what I'm running here. So as you can see, that's making it look nice and shiny and bringing out some of the detail in the depth. This setting here is running a speed of 2200, power of 45, frequency of 500, and a line interval of 0.01. The finishing pass on this little bear made him nice and smooth. So you can see how shiny he is. That's just from the finishing pass. I did not do anything to it, no polishing. Nothing like that. Same for this version on steel. That's just the finishing pass to clean it up and make it nice and shiny. So that's just with settings that you can practice with your laser and find comparable settings. So how do you take one of these coins and get it to have the nice black or antique look? Well, there are several different ways you can do it, and there's no one right way. You just have to find the combination that produces the look that you want to have. One of my favorite ways to finish a coin, and thanks to Tony over at Pixel, is a wet tumbler. The wet tumbler provides a nice finish. You can add some burnishing compound to it, add a little bit of the Shine Bright, and you get a nice shiny finish. And depending on how much of the burnishing compound you add, it will darken it up a little bit and provide a nice polished look. This uses it's a jeweler's mix shot. I'll put the link in the description and you can check that out. But these are great. You can use this. So you can use the wet tumbler. You can use the wet tumbler in combination with your standard Dremel tool. Just get these little polishing wheels that fit in the end of your Dremel. If you want to get into some fine detail polishing, this is the way to go. Typically a green compound works. You can also use brass black if you've never saw it. It's like putting a bluing finish on steel, except it puts a black finish on brass. You apply it with a cloth, set for a little bit, wipe it off, then rinse it off with water, and it'll turn to brass black. Then you can go at it with either the wet tumbler or the polishing wheel and achieve whatever look that you prefer. You can use sandpaper and up to 1500, 2000 grit. So there's all kinds of stuff you can do. That's not an exhaustive list. That's just off the top of my head and a couple things that I have laying around here that I like to use. Also, a brass brush. Get yourself a brass brush, and then as soon as your coin comes off the laser, brass brush, and you'll get a good idea of the quality and how it looks. It'll clean up all that surface debris and give it a nice look. And sometimes I'll take a coin off the laser and won't do any finishing to it. I have a couple settings that will give me either an antique brass look and add a little bit of pitting to it so it looks kind of aged. And sometimes I like that look and I just want to leave it like that and hit it with a brass brush and call it done. So it's totally up to the artist on what artwork you want to create. One of these guys is very handy, just a little cheapy brass brush. In part 2, I definitely will be covering 3D engraving on slate and going over the settings that I used to get this nice, beautiful Viking shield on a piece of slate. Part 3, I'm going to show you what I did with my Noah Laser CO2 Galvo that's right here behind me. Have you ever saw 3D engraving? So that's coming soon in parts 2 and 3. Now, I hate to write scripts, maybe more than I hate painting. Yeah, more than I hate painting, actually. So I probably forgot something. If I did, I'll try to add it in the final edit and put some text up there. If not, I'll make a note of it and cover it in part 2 or 3. Thanks for hanging around this long. I appreciate it. Check the description. You'll be able to download the image adjust setting that I used, and I'll have these other laser settings in a file you can download, and you'll have them for easy reference. Thank you for sticking around this long. I normally don't like to make videos this long because I have a hard time watching them myself, but I wanted to go through the method to my madness and why I landed on these settings and at least give you an idea of where to start with your laser. The spot size calculator will be in the description. Click the link, enter your numbers, and boom, you'll know your spot size. Check out Maker Theory. He's going to have some more detailed videos on timing and frequency coming soon. He's going to have his settings conversion calculator available soon. So all exciting stuff that need to watch out for. And again, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Please hit the like button and please subscribe. If you found this useful, share it to a group on Facebook or on your social media. I would greatly appreciate it. There are links in the description to the wet tumbler, the brass black, some other stuff used in finishing the coins, links where to buy the coins, a link to the Patriot Nation design website so you can get that file using the coupon code so you get it at no charge. Huge shout out to them for the free file. And I think that's all I have for today. If you have any questions, comments, or smart remarks, don't hesitate to head to the comment section below and leave one for me. And I think that's it for today. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. Have a good day, folks.